Hey there, it's Mira. Welcome back to my channel.
Once, Zhuangzhou dreamed he was a butterfly flitting and fluttering about, happy with himself and doing as he pleased. He didn't know that he was Zhuangzhou. Suddenly he woke up, and there he was, solid and unmistakable Zhuangzhou. But he didn't know if it was Zhuangzhou who had dreamt he was a butterfly, or a butterfly dreaming that he was Zhuangzhou. Between Zhuangzhou and the butterfly, there must be some distinction. This is called the transformation of things.
The story I just read was written by Chinese philosopher Zhuang Zi during the late Warring States period. This seemingly simple dream reveals the complexity of existence and illusion, self and world. But this question of dream and reality isn't limited to ancient China. Across oceans and centuries, Argentine writer Jorge Luis Borges was also contemplating this same question: am I the dreamer or am I the dream? In today's video, I want to talk about Jorge Luis Borges' short story, The Circular Ruins. The story has an epigraph to it, which is a quotation from Lewis Carroll's Through the Looking Glass. And if he left off dreaming about you. Well, this is a quotation from the scene in which Tweedledum and Tweedledee tell Alice about the Red King. They explain to Alice that she is a character created in the Red King's dream. So once the Red King is awake, Alice would simply vanish. And I think we'll find how this concept is echoed throughout the story, The Circular Ruins. The Circular Ruins begins with a man getting off a boat on a dark night. He kisses the mud and drags himself to the ruins of a circular temple, which contains a statue that appears to be a tiger or a horse. The man has a singular purpose. He wants to create a man by dreaming of him and bring him into reality. He found the circular ruins the best place for him to work on that goal, so he isolates himself within the crumbling walls, dedicating himself to the sole task of sleeping and dreaming. First, he dreams of an amphitheater full of students, and he lectures on anatomy, cosmography, and magic. He is seeking a soul worthy of taking his place in the universe. And one day, he dismisses the whole class and retains just one pupil who resembles himself. But then he loses the ability to dream and is afflicted with insomnia. So the man realizes he will not be able to return to the dream of his pupil, so he decides to take an entirely different approach. He waits until the day of the full moon, then he purifies himself in the waters of the river, prays to the planetary gods, and falls asleep. And this time, almost immediately, he dreams of a beating heart. He continues to dream organ by organ, and within a year, he has come to the skeleton and the eyelids. Finally, he dreams of a fully fleshed young man, but this youth cannot stand up or open his eyes or speak. The man realizes he may need some divine assistance, so he seeks this from the tiger horse statue commemorated at the temple's ruins. The statue enters his dream and becomes alive, and it tells the man that it is the god Fire. And it is both a horse and a tiger, as well as a bull, a rose, and a storm. And the fire tells the man that it will bring to life the young man that he has created in his dream. And every creature except the fire and the man who dreamed him will take him as a real man. And the fire orders the dreamer to teach his creation the religious rites and send him downriver to inhabit another ruined temple. Then, in the dreaming man's dream, the dreamed man awoke. And the man, now referred to as the sorcerer, spends 2 years teaching the youth as the fire has told him to. He starts to view the youth as a son, whom he kisses and sends off to the circular ruins downstream. But before that, he destroys his son's memory so that he wouldn't know that he was just a phantom. Years later, the sorcerer hears a rumor that in a temple in the north, a magical man can walk on fire and not be burned. And he suddenly remembers that the God's words that only fire and himself would know that his son is a phantom. So he's very worried that his son may soon discover that he is not a real man, but a phantom, which could be a humiliation and vertigo. But suddenly, fire begins to ravage the sorcerer's own temple. Resigned to his fate, he approaches the flames, expecting death. But the flames do not harm him, and with relief, with humiliation, with terror, he realizes he is also the product of another man's dream. So that's basically the plot of this short story. And as a Chinese reader of Jorge Luis Borges, the first thing that comes to my mind after finishing The Circular Ruins was that butterfly dream. Zhuangzhou dreamed he was a butterfly, and when he awoke, he was not sure whether he was a man who had dreamed he was a butterfly or a butterfly who dreamed he was a man. And I think The Circular Ruins gives me a similar vertigo with that ambiguity between a dream and reality. And actually, this butterfly dream was cited many times by Borges in his works. In his essay, A New Refutation of Time, Borges writes, "We shall never know whether Zhuangzhou saw a garden over which he seemed to fly, or a moving yellow triangle which was doubtlessly himself, but it is clear that the image was subjective, even though it was supplied to him by memory." And in that same article, he also cites a 5th century Buddhist treatise, The Path to Purity, suggesting the life of a being lasts as long as an idea. And I do find some resonance between this and the man's thoughts when he closes his eyes. The son I have engendered is waiting for me, and he will not exist if I do not go to him. So I think through this entanglement between dream and reality, Borges is probably contemplating the relationship between mind and existence. Actually, I think from the very beginning of the story, Borges is seeding many clues that foreshadow the possibility that the man or the dreamer is also in a dream. And let me read you the first few lines of this short story, which I believe is very beautifully written, very poetic. "No one saw him slip from the boat in the unanimous night. No one saw the bamboo canoe as he sank into the sacred mud. And yet within days, there was no one who did not know that the taciturn man had come there from the south, and that his homeland was one of those infinite villages that lie upriver on the violent flank of the mountain, where the language of the Zend is uncontaminated by Greek, and where leprosy is uncommon. But in fact, the gray man had kissed the mud, scrambled up the steep bank, without pushing back, probably even without feeling the sharp-leaved bulrushes that slashed his flesh, and dragged himself, faint and bloody, to the circular enclosure, crowned by the stone figure of a horse or tiger, which had once been the color of fire, but was now the color of ashes." This does sound like something that would happen in a dream, right? We don't know who this man is and why he arrived. Everything is just vague. Just like in a dream, we often don't remember how things get started. And as the man climbs up the riverbank, it's suggested that he might not feel the sharp-leaved bulrushes that slashed his flesh. I think this could be a hint of some lack of the ordinary sense of pain. And another clue is that the man comes from infinite villages that lie upriver. If we combine this with what happened afterwards when the man sends his creation or his son to another ruined temple downstream, they constitute an infinite regression that often occurred in Borges' works, that is a dream within a dream within a dream on into infinity, as when two mirrors are placed facing each other. I also discussed this idea in my previous video, Tlön, Uqbar, Orbis, Tertius, so you can check that video if you're interested. And when Borges wrote, he sought out a tomb-like niche in the crumbling wall where he covered himself with unknown leaves. That really makes me think of death and rebirth. And this, coupled with the infinite regression, reminds me of concepts like Samsara or karma in Buddhism. Well, we know that Borges wasn't a Buddhist, but he did study Buddhism for its history and symbolism. And in 1977, he delivered a series of lectures in Buenos Aires titled 7 Nights. And the fourth of the 7 nights was on Buddhism. And let me quote a few words from that lecture. Karma is a cruel law, but it has a curious mathematical consequence. If my present life is determined by my previous one, that previous one was determined by another, and that other by another, and so on without end. Well, isn't this precisely the endless regression of dreams within dreams? And actually, we know that the idea of rebirth is often linked with the human desire for immortality in the face of death. But Borges didn't believe in immortality or future life. He regarded death as a great salvation and immortality as a threat. When I am unhappy, and I allow myself to be unhappy now and then, I think of death as the great salvation. After all, what on earth can it matter what happens to Jorge Luis Borges? I'll see him no more. I think of death as a hope to be totally blotted out, obliterated, and I can count on that. And I know that there's no future life, no cause for fear or for hope. We shall simply vanish, and that's as it should be. I think of immortality as being a threat, but in fact, it will never achieve anything. So I think perhaps this explains why in the circular ruins, when a fire comes, the man first thinks of taking refuge in the water, but soon believes that death will be a crown upon his age and absolve him from his labor. However, he discovers with horror and humiliation that he is immortal, and this immortality comes at the cost of his own reality. And he has transcended death, but only by becoming a phantom. And apart from all the dizzying conundrums of dream and circulation, I think the story also resonates profoundly with the process of art creation, particularly as I read about the man's deep affection for the youth he dreamed, even considering him as his son, and reshaping the right shoulder before sending him off to the temple downriver. Dreaming a character into being is like giving birth to artistic works, like music, literature, and painting. They begin in the artist's imagination and eventually takes on a life of their own. So like the dreamer, artists often see their creation as their children, pouring their heart and soul into nurturing them into existence. And I believe this connection becomes even more profound when we consider Borges' own words. Borges once said, "A dream is a creation," and he added that the dreaming experience is not necessarily in sleep. When you're thinking out a poem, there is little difference between the fact of being asleep and that of being awake. And finally, I think the relationship between the man and the god fire is also very interesting, because at first, the sculpture is just a stone figure of a horse or a tiger, no longer honored by mankind. And it is after the man throws himself at the feet of this stone figure that it enters a stream and becomes alive, becomes the god fire. So I'm thinking, does this mean the god fire is also a creation of the man's dream? And is Borges trying to say that God only exists through human belief and imagination? And furthermore, fire asks the man to teach his youth the religious rites and send him to another ruined temple downriver, so that a voice might glorify the god in that deserted place. And this really looks to me like an emphasis of the human role in maintaining worship and keeping the religion, the deity, relevant. But of course, these are just my interpretation on the circular ruins, while Borges' works are always like labyrinths with infinite possibilities. So if you don't agree with me, or if you've got a different interpretation, please leave me a comment. That's all for my video today. Thank you so much for watching. I'll see you soon.